culture? How do we shift culture for agility, and how does that work in an agile environment? So this is actually a piece of an agile leadership class that we do, talking about culture and then how leaders can start shifting that culture to help the company become more agile and get on a nice sustainable journey towards lasting agility. So to start off with, I'm going to introduce this model called the Competing Values Framework. And so the Competing Values Framework's been around for a while. It was actually developed at the University of Michigan back in, I think, the 80s. And so I'm just going to go through sort of the basics of it as an introduction for us tonight. I've got an little exercise for us to do. We'll see how this goes with so far 64 people and counting. But before we jump to the exercise, I'll just sort of introduce the model here. So if you want to, at home on your Zoom, in the top right corner right here in my little window, if you click the button there, that's a little blue window with 3 dots, if you hit that and then go to pin video, that'll make me really big so you can see what I'm drawing back here. So that's probably a good option, or you can go to speaker view, usually that works as well. So this model, competing values, so the point here is that there's some tension between these different ends of the spectrum here in these values. So I'm just going to cover the top, bottom, north, south spectrum here first. And so one of the competing values, the tensions we see is between organizational cultures that at the top here are flexible. So they're flexible and usually people oriented as well. So another sort of subtext here, people oriented. And so on the top here, more flexible, adaptable, things like that, people oriented. At the bottom here, more about stability and more about systems. Stability, there we go. And more about systems, things like that. So inanimate objects, stuff like that. So the top, people and flexible, bottom, stability. And so there's a tension that goes here in the organization about where we sort of lean towards, right? More people oriented or more things oriented, more flexible or more stable and secure, that kind of stuff. So that's the first axis here. So the other way, going left to right, on the left here, more about here and now and more about internal focus. So focused on us internally as a company, things like that, and the here and now, present tense kind of stuff. And on the other end of the spectrum then, we get into, of course, the opposite of that being more external focus. So external or more future oriented. So looking to the future, seeing what's out there on the horizon, that kind of stuff. And so you can see these tensions, of course, being more external focused or internal focused. And so as we think about these tensions, it starts to generate some ideas of what the culture sort of predominant culture looks like. So as we think about companies as they start their journey, right? Think about startups, things like that. So as startups sort of take shape and get off the ground, go from that, one person with an idea into the garage startup and start recruiting people and coming up with ideas and that kind of stuff. We start over here in this green culture. So being more flexible, so we have to adapt to change and trying to discover things, but also externally focused. So looking at the market, looking at ideas, things like that. So we call this the create quadrant. And so some of the key things that are going on here, really about autonomy. So autonomy, innovation, so coming up with ideas. So really focused, on people and autonomy, innovation, ideas. This is very visionary culture, right? Looking to the future. And a lot about ideas, of course, too. So autonomy, innovation, vision, ideas. So that's really the main focus here in the create culture. So most companies start here, right? So a startup company getting off the ground, things like that. So more flexible, more externally focused. And as they get going, got a lot of ideas, a lot of innovation. And at some point, that venture capital company firm that's funded them says, hey, this is all great, but we should probably make money at some point, right? Let's actually start trying to compete in the market, win some customers, things like that. So that's when we move into this next culture down here, where we go from people and flexibility down to more stability, system orientation, but still externally focused and trying to get the product to market. So we call this the compete quadrant, so competing in the market. And so key attributes here, so bringing the product to market, we want to win, right? Get out there and find those customers, win in the marketplace. So win There's a lot of competition here, want to be first and best. So be first, best. And a couple more things here. So getting out there, it's really usually an intense culture as well. So a lot of what's happening here is we're really competing, pushing the envelope, that kind of stuff. So really market focused and trying to bring the product out there. So take that idea and actually turn it into a real product. So market, and again, very intense culture. So do anything to win, driving, A-type personality kind of folks here. And so going from the startup company with ideas down into actually bringing it to market, trying to compete, make money, that kind of stuff. And so the evolution of companies then sort of takes us to from the create to compete. And then as we start making money, things might start to get out of control a bit because we're running so fast, trying to beat the competitors and all that kind of stuff. And so then there tends to be a focus more on the internal aspects of the company. So stability focused, but also internally focused. So this is where we start getting things like systems and processes in place. So processes, some things that help us with stability in terms of expectation setting, things like that, goal setting. So setting standards for performance, stuff like that. And more structure, right, usually. So think about a startup company, usually not a whole lot of structure in terms of departments and hierarchies and things like that. When we go to the compete quadrant, it's more about pushing the pedal down on sales and marketing and that kind of stuff. But as we start to evolve the company, we start to get into more hierarchy, structure, the need for more organization, right? So things like that. So we get into structure, and then there's also a focus on quality. So structure. And so we start getting the product out to market, but we need to make sure it's a good product now. So let's start focusing on quality, internal focused on systems, and quality. So evolution of the company going from startup to trying to get the product to market, now to trying to build the pieces of the company that will help us last, right? Last and have stability for the long term, things like that. And so once we get there, then a lot of times what happens is we start to stagnate a little bit, right? So we start focusing maybe too much on process and too much on hierarchy and things like that. Becomes maybe a bit of a stoic kind of place. And so oftentimes what happens then is we evolve towards more people orientation again. So going from the ideas to competing in the market to more stability, and then coming back around to people focus. Oops, and this quadrant, by the way, is called the control quadrant. And so this one up here is the collaboration quadrant. So focusing more on people and trying to take advantage of all the great things that we've built, but getting more people-oriented, collaborative, becoming more supportive of our people, helping to grow and learn and things like that. And so this one, so more supportive and inclusive. So supportive, inclusive, more family-oriented kind of place. So think about this more like, enjoying coworkers and having parties and very social and fun and that kind of stuff is a lot of what evolves from this. So social aspects. And so as we think about these different cultures, so create, compete, control, and collaborate cultures, every company has some aspect of all four of these. And so what we try to help organizations understand is where's your dominant culture. Could have one or more of those be the dominant culture, but every company has all the pieces of it, right? It's just a matter of which ones are you heavier weighted towards. And as you think about where you want to go in the future, then which ones do we want to try to shift towards, right? And so as we think about this with our eye on Agile, of course, for our talk tonight, oftentimes what happens is we find companies that are in red that are trying to move to these other areas. And so Agile tends to be in the areas outside of red typically. So think about risk management, process, hierarchy, a lot of that kind of stuff is here in red. And Agile tends to be in most of the other areas. And so one thing you think about is like the Agile Manifesto. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. So if you go through each of those values in the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions over process and tools, as you go through each one of those, you can start to sort of identify where do they fit here, for example. So individuals and interactions going to be on the top, right? People oriented and usually internally focused. So you think about that one maybe being the yellow culture, and certainly the process and tools part, red, right? About process, tools, stability, that kind of stuff. And if you go through each of the four values, you can sort of identify where they fit, but the right side of the equation, the one we're trying to dampen a bit is usually the red side of things. So it's interesting to think about as we try to shift culture here. It's usually trying to shift away from red. Not always, because sometimes our companies are maybe too far into one of these other areas. They do need some stability, and that's where things like, for example, Scrum can give some stability. If your company is too far out in one of these other areas, that's where Scrum can help by putting some structure, time boxes, roles, things like that. So for example, extremely green, way out there, super innovative culture with no rules, no boundaries, total innovation concept, that kind of stuff. It could be that pulling a little bit red towards Scrum could help a little bit, give structure, rules, things like that. So anyway, just interesting to think about this culture model and how it relates to Agile. So we're going to do a little exercise here. We'll see how this works with now 69 people in the room. So we're not going to worry about breakout rooms because that's not going to help. Breakout rooms we use in Zoom quite a bit when we can have small group conversations, but breaking out into groups larger than maybe 5 is not really useful for conversation anyway. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to send you a link to a Mural board. So some of you might have used Mural here over the last few months for collaboration space. And so given this model we just went through, just sort of the basics here, I'm going to ask you to go into this board and just try to sort out some pieces here into these quadrants just to help you understand what they're, a little bit more detail about what they're about. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and just show you what we're going to get into. And so everyone see my screen okay? Yep, okay, cool. So we've got this called the culture game. So this is again part of our leadership class. So you can zoom into Mural here. I'll send you a link here in just a second, but I'm just gonna walk through what we're gonna do. So there's 6 different groups. The groups don't really matter for our purposes tonight, but what you can do is just go in and grab one of these little concepts and try to figure out where does this go in this culture model we just walked through. So if I grab something like this, visionary, so what you're going to want to do is just sort of figure out, okay, where does the concept of being a visionary fit in this model? And so this one, pretty spot on what we talked about, certainly in the create quadrant, right? So that more future focus, external market focus, as well as people orientation and flexibility about vision. So that's going to go in this quadrant, right? So as you jump in here, you can just grab one or two. We've got 69 people. I think there's probably close to 70 or so different items in here. So you can just grab one or two, see where they go. If you find one you think is in the wrong spot, feel free to grab that too. And just try to move it to the right spot here. But we'll just give a little bit of time for an exercise here, just for fun to get to understand this model a bit better. So feel free to grab any one of these things as you get into it and try to figure out where it goes. So with that, I'm going to put a link here in the chat. So if you hit that, it should take you right to Mural and you should be able to jump in and have at it for a few minutes. So I'm just going to pause and just watch what happens here. And as you get in there, try to move things around, and we'll resume here maybe in about 3-4 minutes, something like that. It's great, lots of activity. So I can share my screen. I think if I share my screen, it'll maybe record that too, which would be nice. I also love how Mural has different little animal names for everyone. Got visiting horse, gorilla, cat, spider, bee, all kinds of fun things. So my typical leadership class is somewhere around 20, 25 people usually. This takes a little bit of a while with fewer people. When there's 70 people in here, it goes pretty darn fast. That's interesting. So just sort of scanning through here, it looks like we got things in a lot of the right places here. Some of them are kind of tricky, understanding where they might go. Sort of your perspective. For example, I see someone's got craftsmanship right now. That's one, sort of think about what aspects of craftsmanship do you want to focus on. Could be in pretty much any one of the quadrants, right? So think about craftsmanship and quality, could be red. If it's craftsmanship in terms of trying to build new things for the market, bring those out, certainly blue. Could be other arguments for the other ones too. Craftsmanship in terms of mentoring people to be great craftsmen could be yellow. So it's kind of interesting that some of these depend on your perspective as well. So, all right, looks like we got most of them placed, a few things still moving around, but that looks pretty good. So just give you a little practice and exposure to the model here to just try to get in tune with where some of these things fit. So the question then for you to take back is, where do you think your culture is? Where's the dominant culture for you and your organization? And of course, like I said, every organization has different aspects of this, but you got all four quadrants in some way, right? Some might be heavier weighted than others, but, and you might have different cultures, subcultures within departments and things like that too. So you can imagine, a lot of large companies, different departments such as risk, compliance, legal, those kind of things might be more weighted towards red. You've got an innovation group, probably green, HR might be yellow. And so, different areas of the organization might be heavier weighted there. But what we try to look at as we help companies sort of evolve towards Agile is sort of the holistic picture. And so really thinking about, as an organization as a whole, where are we? And where do we want to be to compete better in the marketplace in terms of whatever our goals are? So not necessarily the blue compete, but competing for whatever we're trying to do in the marketplace. And if we're talking about Agile, it's usually we're trying to deliver more value and adapt to change. And so trying to move more towards those kind of things is typically what we see. So with that, I'm going to move on to, so great to have some background here with the culture model. So I'm going to move on to what we're going to do with this. So as we think about trying to shift culture, so understanding culture first, that's pretty important. But then trying to understand what we're going to do with culture to try to shift it and take advantage of this understanding. So another model here, I'm going to fill this in a little bit as we go. So first off, what we're trying to do is shift culture, right? Culture is sort of central to the organization. So I'm going to stick that here. What we're trying to do is focus on culture change. And of course, if you are experienced with Agile, it's not just about changing process and things like that, all that surface level stuff that looks good but doesn't actually matter. Agile transformation is about culture change, about changing the way we do things around here, the way we think about things, about behaviors and all the different pieces about how we engage with customers and employees and all that kind of stuff. It's not just about, the process changes about how we get work done and the surface level stuff you can do with Scrum. It's about the deeper meaning, about how we become an effective organization to really achieve our goals and become that organization that we really want to be in the future. So what we're talking about here is shifting culture. And so the way we typically see this happen, some patterns that we see in organizations as they try to go through their Agile transformation. So first one we see is oftentimes what organizations do when they send someone off to, for example, go to a 2-day Scrum class, and they come back and say, okay, let's change the whole organization based on my 2-day understanding of how Agile works, right? And so what we usually see in that case is it's probably someone low in the organization, Scrum Master, manager, director level, maybe something like that. And what we see is the extent of agility and then over time is that it looks like this, sort of this pattern of sort of fits and starts, not really quite ever making it there, seeing some maybe short-term benefits, but things that often just aren't lasting and they go away pretty fast. And so we call this thrashing agility. So we're just sort of flailing at it, right? Nothing's really lasting. We're not really making any meaningful change. And it's a tough situation, right? Very frustrating oftentimes for people at the team level because we're just not quite making it there, right? They have a lot of excitement, but it's starting to hit barriers and things where they might get permission to say, hey, let's go start a Scrum team. But as soon as they stop giving the traditional status reports and Gantt charts, people come back and say, hey, it's okay to do Agile as long as you still give us the old project management stuff, right? And so it sort of collapses and then restarts. And that's typically what we see in that kind of pattern, unfortunately. And so the next pattern we see, a little bit better here. So in terms of increasing agility, looks like this. We get off the blocks pretty well, and we're increasing our agility. Things feel pretty good. But we sort of plateau, right? We hit a point where we say, you know what, we're there. We declare victory. We're Agile. We've made it, right? And so what happens then, oftentimes, is things start to shrink backward, right? We start hitting organizational barriers that don't allow us to go further. we feel like we've got good enough, right? We've changed some things about how we work. And so we start, taking our foot off the gas pedal, stop focusing on Agile and just start going back to the way things were. And things start to decline, fall backwards, and oftentimes all the way back to where we started. And we call this limited agility. And so the reason this is happening is because we haven't really changed the things that matter yet. And so this approach oftentimes looks like this, what we call outside in. We're trying to change things, but we're coming at it more from a process perspective. We're coming at it from the way that it's easy to change certain things. And so what that looks like is from the outside in, we run into this barrier around culture that protects it, where we have things like structures, organizational structures, hierarchies, that kind of stuff, policies about how we get work done, for example, about budgeting, planning, right? Annual planning, budgeting, how we allocate for projects and allocate resources and people and things like that. So policy structures, and then metrics. How do we measure success in the organization? We run into these barriers that protect our current culture. So our current culture is sort of protected by these things, so we can't change it from the outside in very easily. And so what ends up happening is the things we can change around it end up being this process level stuff. So simply just, how do we actually manage work at a tactical level? So we can start changing that to look more agile, but it's usually just surface level kind of stuff, right? And so the outside in changes that we see often are things like when we say, okay, let's go do Scrum. Leaders say, let's go do Scrum, but they don't change the way they manage the situation, they manage the organization. So they're still expecting the old metrics. We're still budgeting the same old way, things like that. But we're saying just, the team level, you guys over there, go ahead and do Scrum. As long as you get me all the old stuff that I still need, it's okay to keep doing it, right? And so what happens is we get blocked. So we're blocked by this layer of policy structure and metrics, and it just doesn't go anywhere, right? It gets limited, well, in terms of long-term agility. So it's limited in its long-term effectiveness. And so again, sort of plateaus, we hit these barriers of structure, policy, metrics, and that's when it starts to fall backward. And we start saying, oh, let's go back to some of those things that worked before, and eventually we get back to where we started. And so unfortunately, we see this quite a bit in organizations. And so for those of you who've been to my classes or talked to us about helping with transformations, you probably hear a lot of stories from us about companies like Capital One, where I did a lot of consulting for a couple of years, helping them with their 4th attempt at an agile transformation. And so in that case, the first 3, we studied those a bit and tried to understand what was happening there. And we saw these patterns, right? So we saw the very first one, of course, was team level, like I just described. Then we started seeing these things where there was some support, but not enough to change at the leadership level, at the organizational level. We were changing more like department level and team level process and things like that. So it was a very tough situation where they didn't quite break through. So the outside in approach, coming at it from that perspective, usually doesn't have long-term success. So now let's think about how to make this work, right? So instead of going outside in, what if we start with culture? And that's what we want to talk about tonight. So understanding the culture model and how to start shifting this in a good way starts with starting to shift culture. And so if we start with culture and try to break through from the inside out, right, through that barrier of structures, policies, and metrics, it works a lot better, right? We start getting an idea of what we want this company to look like in the future so that we can start creating the culture that we want, and that really drags the company along through those policies, structures, and metrics as we start making changes to those things that really matter. So the process level stuff isn't going to help in the long term. What really helps pull culture is policy, structures, and metrics, changing the organizational design, changing how we measure success, changing the policies about how we get work done and what's required. So those are things we really need to look at if we want long-term success. And so what that looks like then, if we're going to change those deeper things that matter, it's a slower beginning. It looks something more like this. It's going to take some time to work through those things, but it's on an upward trajectory. And so what we call this is growing agility. So growing and lasting change that we're looking at. And so in this case, again, we're changing the things that really matter, trying to help pull culture through these policy structures and metrics. And so this growing agility line is a slower role to get there, but it's lasting change, and that's the part that really is important. So we're not just wasting a bunch of money on surface level stuff that we know is going to go away just to check the box and say we're agile, right? So it really is starting to become an agile company, right? From the inside out, by changing culture, shifting the things that matter to try to get there. Okay? So as we go through our leadership classes, this is a big focus for leaders. And so one thing to mention on this note as well is oftentimes what I see from leadership classes for Agile is people trying to teach leaders how to do Scrum. That's probably not the right thing to do. So it's good that they understand how Scrum works and things, but if you're talking about leadership, that's not what it's about. Agile leadership is more about how to be a leader in an Agile environment, because it's very different than it is in a traditional environment, right? Being a leader in a traditional environment, oftentimes there's a completely different mentality about command and control and planning up front and trying to have confidence and stability up front about we've got everything nailed down. And that doesn't work in a complex environment. And so what we want to focus on in an Agile leadership context is really understanding how to make directional shifts and start experimenting in the organization. And so it's not about necessarily doing Scrum and understanding how product owners and Scrum Masters work. It's much more about how to shift culture through experiments. And the experiments focus on those three things in this yellow ring: policies, structures, metrics. Those are the things that really matter. Those are the things that leaders control. No one else does, right? Leaders are the ones that control those things about how we structure the organization, the organizational design, how departments are laid out and how they interact. The policies about how we get work done and maybe bring things to market, things like that. Of course, and then metrics, right? How do we measure success across the organization? Leaders own these things. And so to shift culture, they have to start experimenting with these things to try to understand what's going to work for us. What's this company want to create in the future? Having some idea, sort of that vision of where we're going in the future, but then being able to actually do something about it, right? To actually start pulling culture in the right direction. And so what we talk about in terms of helping leaders understand how to do that, beyond understanding these basic models here, really start to think about Agile not as a process like Scrum and Kanban, but much more about business agility. How do we start aligning the pieces of the organization to go where we want to go? So this inside out approach, really focusing on aligning our culture to Agile. So Agile culture and alignment to it. So we start thinking about what's important to our culture, right? What kind of a company are we trying to be in the future? And how does that align to Agile, right? Not about Scrum and process and that kind of stuff, but more about how do we want to interact with our customers, right? Do we want to pull them in and collaborate with them? Or do we want to keep them at arm's length and be a black box, things like that? So the two ends of the spectrum there. So we start aligning the pieces of the organization, aligning the culture of what we want to create in the future to the Agile values and see if it matches. Because if it doesn't, Agile maybe isn't the right fit for us. So Agile is not the right thing for every company in every circumstance, right? So we start thinking about what is it we're trying to accomplish and do in the future, and how does this align? And leaders have to start aligning the process, policy, structures, metrics, all that kind of stuff to that effort, right? To sort of get things moving in the right direction, sort of in lockstep. So as we do this, we're trying to build Agile structures, of course. So structures. So what that means is starting to change department level kinds of things, organizational structures and business units. So going from things like component structures, component teams. So what that looks like in a lot of organizations, thinking about IT especially, is when you have groups or departments that are specialized in certain either functional areas or systems, right? So think about, you might have a department that's dedicated to business analysis or quality or development, right? So you could also have people or teams that own systems specifically. So those we call component teams. And it feels very good and efficient that we have those things, because then they specialize, they get really good at it, that kind of stuff. But guess what? None of those groups by themselves can actually deliver value. And so as we start thinking about Agile, focused on value delivery, you have to start thinking about the organizational structures we have. And so if we have something called a development department, a business analysis department, a quality department, we start recognizing that, if we have a problem that we need to solve for a customer, none of them can do it by themselves. What it generates is a lot of handoffs, problems, dependencies, things like that, that we constantly have to manage. And then you've got a bunch of extra people running around trying to manage all the dependencies. Where we want to solve the problem with this organizational change, so structural change, is starting to create groups who can actually deliver value end to end. And so that we call feature teams, for example. So in a feature team, it would be, okay, if our group needs people that can do development, testing, business analysis, database work, and need to work across 5 different systems to deliver a solution to a customer, then we should organize our department to do that. Instead of having separate departments that have to have handoffs, let's have a department that focuses on solution delivery all the way through. And so those are the kind of things we're talking about with structural change, right? If you have those component departments, we want to start shifting to feature departments, feature teams. And what that means is product orientation, customer focus, things like that. So that's kind of stuff we're talking about with structure and policy as well. So policy is about how we get work done, how we collaborate. When we have these silos and walls up, it's tough for those groups to actually talk to each other. We're, again, managing dependencies. And so what we want to do is have policies that eliminate dependencies. So this gets into policies, for example, with HR, where we start promoting people to be cross-functional, start learning things, right? So instead of being very deeply specialized in one thing, we start putting policies in place that encourage people to become broader skilled, right? What we call T-shaped, where they might have depth and experience, but they also need to have breadth, right? So we have breadth of experience so that we can collaborate better, deliver to the customer. And so those are examples of kind of things we're looking at. So structures, policies, and then also to mention metrics. So when I said success metrics here, if we think about traditional environments, oftentimes the success metrics, at least at a project or program level, oftentimes end up being things like on time and on budget. And so if that's our success metric, usually we're going to make that happen, right? We can be on time and on budget. But what it requires is we put the blinders on, fend off change at all costs, and meet the goal, which is on time and on budget. And so if we want to start shifting our culture towards this more agile way of thinking, so we start aligning our values and we start asking ourselves, is on time and on budget the most important thing for us? Is that the way we want to measure success for ourselves? Is that how our customers think about success? And oftentimes the answer is no. On time and on budget is probably secondary to something else called deliver the right thing, right? Actually deliver value to the customer. Because we can be on time and on budget with the wrong thing pretty easily, right? What we want to do is focus on delivering value, getting the right thing to market to the customer. And then on time and on budget ends up being a secondary consideration. And so that's the kind of thinking we need to start evaluating for ourselves as leaders. If we're trying to go agile, let's make sure we're doing it for the right reasons and then understand what the trade-offs are, right? So we start shifting success metrics, things like that as well. It starts to show what kind of a culture we're trying to create and try to align, again, our culture and what we're trying to be in when we grow up to this whole agile approach, right? This whole agile mindset. So inside out approach, really trying to focus on agile culture, get alignment between where we think we want to go and agile and see if it fits, first of all, right? And then if it does, then we're starting to build these agile structures, policies, metrics to make sure that we start pulling in the right direction. And it's not going to happen all at once, right? It's going to take some time. And so as we think about this, typical agile transformation, anyone know how long these things take, agile transformations? So anyone want to take a whack at what that looks like? How long does an agile transformation take?
7 to 10 years, maybe.
Hey, someone's been in one of my classes before. That sounded like James Black. So 7 to 10 years, that's typically what we see from an agile transformation. So it's interesting because I see a lot of consultants out there who mention, hey, we've done 5 agile transformations, or I've been a part of 5 agile transformations in the last year. Not possible, right? When we talk about transformation in this way, because we're shifting culture, that's a big deal, right? So really changing the core of the organization, the DNA of the organization, that takes some time and effort. You've really got to get deep and involved and help leaders really understand what we're getting into and help take the steps that really matter, right? Surface level change is easy, right? We can get off the blocks pretty fast and just launch a bunch of teams. And we see that sometimes where, organizations will sort of get on this blue line and just launch 30 teams in the first month. And so what happens is they start doing Scrum, they see some surface level benefits, but it's not lasting. It sort of falls down quickly. And so as we start really wanting to make lasting change and really become this agile company that's going to be able to survive in the long term, then it is really digging deeper, right? So it's getting into these deeper issues of policy, structure, metrics, And again, only leaders can change those things. So pretty important to understand how we do that. All right. So let me pause here for just a second. We've got one or two more things I want to cover, but let me just pause here. We've been throwing a lot of content at you. And by the way, this is the couple things I've covered so far. We probably spent half a day on in our leadership class, where we've spent about 30 minutes on it. So it's drinking from the fire hose a bit, I'm sure. But let me pause there and just see if we have any questions, thoughts, comments so far.
Hey, Aaron, Bob Steffen here.
Yeah.
How about a couple examples of metrics that would help us understand where we are in that that growth agile line?
Yeah. So thinking about success metrics. So the one we talked about, sort of the obvious one that I usually point to, being trading off on time and on budget for value delivery, customer satisfaction, those kind of things. And so as we start realigning the organization, so again, going from more like component or departmental specialization structures into customer-facing structures, then along with that comes other metrics, right? So if we're internally focused on those departments or functional areas, oftentimes the metrics we're looking at are very internal as well, right? We're only looking at a small piece of the whole picture. And so we call that local optimization. And so, for example, just using simple IT examples, if we have a QA department, their metrics for success might be number of defects found and things like that. Amount of code that we were able to manually test and how fast and those kind of things. So those are good and interesting metrics if your world is QA, right? Or development could be how fast we're able to code features and how many lines of code and things like that. But that's just an internal sort of focused metric where we call that local optimization. We're locally looking at just our little piece of the world and trying to optimize for that. And when we do that, oftentimes what happens is it sub-optimizes for the big picture, which is trying to deliver value to the customer. So as we start shifting structures to be more customer-oriented, what we call vertically oriented and agile, then we start giving ourselves opportunity to look at different metrics. And so if we take the just simple example of development and QA departments, if we start shifting that to be a product delivery mechanism, then instead of looking at testing metrics and coding metrics, we start looking at value delivery metrics. And it just opens up the opportunity to look at the global picture. And so in that case, that's when we start looking at things like customer satisfaction, cycle time of product delivery, feedback loop cycle times, things like that. So those might be the things you start looking at in that kind of example, right? And you can start looking at other things as well beyond just product delivery. If you're focused, for example, if you're looking at yellow culture, trying to become more people-oriented, family-oriented, that kind of stuff, it could be that you're focused on employee engagement, right? That aspect of Agile about valuing people and their capabilities and things like that. And so your metrics for that might be things about employee engagement, retention, speed of hiring, longevity of people, promotion rates, things like that. So it just sort of opens up different possibilities of what's important, right? Beyond just local optimization, looking at the bigger picture. So does that help, Bob? Cool. All right, other thoughts, questions here so far? All right, feel free to chime in, by the way. This model, so again, understanding how some different patterns work here as we go through transformations. Now let's think about leadership specifically. How do leaders actually engage to actually make these changes, and what kind of leaders are we looking for to be able to do this? So I'm going to get into a bit of a leadership model here. So these things out of the way. So there's a progression of leadership that we focus on called Leadership Agility. So there's actually a book out there from a guy named Bill Joyner and Stephen Josephs. And they've developed this model that we use quite a bit in our consulting. And so we find it pretty valuable. And it sort of links a lot of the pieces together we've talked about so far. So competing values framework and the way we think about cultures in that model. And then what we just talked about with transformation patterns and trying to pull culture through changing the things that matter. And so to do that, we're looking for leaders to try to advance their capability to be able to understand these things and make effective change. And so I'm just going to walk through this model real quick and we can talk a bit about it. So as we think about this model, there's 3 levels here. So the model is actually a little bit more complex than this, but we're going to do the simplified version for tonight. But it starts with this one called expert leader here. And so the expert leader, this is where most people start their management career, right? Management and leadership career. And so I know I did. So I went through this progression. And so usually what this looks like is, especially in IT, I imagine a lot of us are from the IT world, kind of looks like this. So you're a developer, joined the company as a developer and got pretty good at it. And you got promoted to a senior developer, and then got promoted to a tech lead. And then someone one day said, hey, you know what? You're really good at writing code and seem to know how people are supposed to do that. Why don't you take a manager role, right? And so you can help lead the team, lead the people, help them understand what to do and mentor them and help solve problems and all that kind of stuff. And so your first entry into management oftentimes is you were really good at that job, right? So you get promoted into being the manager of that functional area. So I was a developer, got promoted into being a dev manager, right? So that expert level of leadership is sort of the table stakes usually for getting into management. You have to know and understand how the job works so you can help people do it, right? So that's often the first stop. And so this expert leader really drawing a lot of their credibility from just simply understanding what the people that work for them are supposed to be doing. So they can help them solve problems, they can work through issues, guide them, mentor them, give them the right coaching and training that they need to be able to be successful. And so that kind of leadership is, again, often the starting point here, but it's often focused on the doing aspects of the job, right? So really focused on doing the job, but being able to understand how those pieces are supposed to be done so you can help make sure people do it correctly. So being the expert in that field, helping them do it right. And so the focus here really ends up being on the work itself and often very tactical. So your view of the world sort of being just the current problem to solve this week, right? Today, this week, that kind of stuff. So sort of a here and now view focused on just getting the work done, right? And of course we need that, right? Organizations need that, people who can actually dive in and do the work and get it done. And that's a pretty important aspect. And that's sort of where leadership and management careers usually start. So as we progress then, as we get bigger problems to solve, we start getting into a need for a little bit higher level of leadership. And so we call this the achiever leader. And so the achiever leader, really this starts to get into someone who's starting to look at the bigger picture a little bit. So beyond just what's the work in front of you right now for today, this week, that kind of stuff, it starts to get into people that can put together projects and programs and organize people and manage a bigger group. And it gets the capability to go beyond just managing what I know, right? So the expert's managing people usually that they understand the job. The achiever leader is advancing to the point where they can probably manage people that they don't know the job, right? So think about, oftentimes senior managers, directors, even vice presidents sort of getting into this where I wasn't a developer, or maybe I was a developer, but now I'm starting to manage people who are business analysts, QA people, documentation, DBAs, starting to broaden out that skill set. I don't have direct knowledge of how they do their job, but I can start to motivate them. I can start to organize them. I can start to align them to actually achieve outcomes and goals and things like that. And so the focus here for the achiever leader really is about leadership. So they're actually leading the charge, leading the project, the program, trying to achieve goals. And so the focus here for the expert was about getting work done. The achiever is about projects and goals. So projects, meeting goals, setting stretch goals and targets and things like that. And the focus here ends up being usually strategic. So going from just tactical focus into a strategic focus. And most organizations, this is what they're shooting for, right? This is what most HR policies and performance management systems and things like that are mostly focused on, trying to create this kind of leader, the person who can take charge, motivate people, organize things, and get the job done, right? And so going from expert to achiever, that's a pretty good leap there. And most organizations really benefit from having those kind of leaders in place, right? Because we can actually accomplish things. We can set longer term goals than just today's work or tomorrow's work or next week's work. We start looking at longer time horizons like quarters and years and things like that. So really getting to the point where we can get stuff done, right? Across multiple skill sets and things like that. But we start to hit some limits there. And the reason we hit those limits is because these two leaders are still mostly focused on themselves. And so we call these two levels here, sort of the text above it is heroic leadership. So heroic leadership, because the expert really focused on their expertise and skill set. That's sort of how they derive their leadership capability, their street cred, that kind of stuff from being the expert. The achiever is still focused on themselves, because usually what they're driving, the project and goals, are their goals. It's my goals. I've decided what the right thing is to do. And so I'm going to align people to achieve my goals, my desired outcomes. And so what that often looks like is there's a lot of benefits to this achiever leader, but the limits end up being when it's not their idea, or they can't see the bigger picture of what we maybe should do, because I'm so worried about making sure everyone gets on my bus to achieve my goal, and we start missing opportunities for bigger things that we didn't realize were out there potentially. And so there's a lot of benefits and a lot of great things that happen for the achiever leader, but unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is we get on that sort of limiting curve. And so coming back to this model for a second, oftentimes what happens is we get off the blocks saying, hey, let's achieve this goal. We get to the top of the hill here and we say, success, we did it, right? We achieved the goal. We've managed to be agile, right? And so what happens is we take our foot off the gas pedal, move on to the next project or program, and things start to devolve. Because what we've done is propped up the tent poles with our heroic leadership. And what happens is when we move on to the next project, we let go of those poles and things start to collapse, because the leader hasn't really built the lasting structures that will allow things to continue, because it's all about me and my ideas and my leadership. And so unfortunately, we see that a lot, where we see check the box agile. Yes, we've done it. Great. We've done an agile transformation, check the box and move on, get the promotion, things like that. And so I don't want to beat up on this leadership style too much. There are, like I said, a lot of benefits and a lot of good things that come out of it, but it is a limiting factor, just sort of the approach and mentality we often see here. And again, a lot of performance management systems are trying to create this leader to achieve those goals, get the project done, and be able to move on to the next thing. And so with that kind of mentality, again, there's some limiting factors. And so thinking about the next level of leadership here, we call catalyst leadership. And so as we progress here, by the way, we're building capability. It's not replacing it, it's building capability. So as we get to the achiever leader, they still have the expert leadership capability inside of them, right? So they can draw on that when they need to. When things hit the fan, we can jump back down and be that expert leader when we need to help solve problems and get into more tactical detail if we need to, but we've got the capability to think bigger. As we progress to the catalyst leader, we're going even further beyond that, right? So beyond ourselves and the heroic leadership, into a much bigger picture. And this is where we get into a big leap here. So what we see in this model, the big leap here, is really going beyond yourself and being able to admit that I might not have the best ideas myself. Other people might have better ideas than I do. And so let's see what those are, right? I have some ideas, but they may not be the best. So let's get more collaboration, more people's opinions on the table, more diversity of thought and experience and things like that. And so this catalyst leader really looking at a much bigger picture, not just about the project or program or the current goal. It's about building lasting capability, lasting structures, lasting ideas, things like that. So looking much longer term. So beyond just getting work done and getting projects done, really looking at the bigger picture about the whole organization and trying to look at culture. So trying to shift culture to be lasting and meaningful into the future, not just to achieve this year's goals to get the bonus and the promotion and check the box. It's about, let's set this whole thing up for long-term success, right? So it's thinking about the best ideas possible. And so the focus then beyond tactical and strategic, of course, gets to visionary. So long-term vision of where we need to go in the future, which direction we need to head in order to be successful and be a lasting long-term going concern, right, as a company. So the focus here then, going from beyond doing to leading, is then to coaching, really helping to coach people in the organization to be effective, to reach their true potential. And so this person really going beyond the heroic nature of really being me focused about my ideas and my capabilities and my views of the world, into coaching and finding out what ideas are out there from our people in our organization, trying to get them on the table and then coaching them to become the best they can be. Even if it doesn't align with my goals specifically, we're trying to be the best we can be as an entire organization. And so the capability to do that relies on these three dimensions that help us sort of grow into this leadership model and understand sort of where we need to focus our energy to become better and better and become more agile leaders. So 3 dimensions, first off, the one that's pulling this direction is about our view of the time horizon. So time horizon. So the first one, of course, the expert leader, the time horizon here is about pretty much here and now, right? Solving today's problem, this week's problem is very, usually short-term focus. The achiever leader, a bit further out, right? They're thinking strategically about bigger things, projects, programs. And so usually the time horizon they're able to process pretty effectively is going to be measured in quarters and a couple of years, maybe something like that, 18 months, 2 years time horizon. But the catalyst leader looking much further beyond that. What are things going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, things like that, to really be able to set us up for success in the future. So first off, time horizon. Second thing, the view of the system. When we say view of the system, what I mean is the system of the organization. And so back to the expert leader, the view of the system is really about my department, my area, the work that's going on around me directly. So the view of the view of the world of the organization is pretty limited there. The achiever, again, usually looking at programs and projects, so it ends up being the view of the world, looks more like maybe a business unit or a department or a product line, something like that. And so being able to be strategic with those kind of things, but still the view is limited. They're not looking at the broader organization and the bigger context, right? And so the catalyst leader then looking at the whole view of the organization, the system, the ecosystem of our organization. So even maybe going beyond the walls of our company. So looking at the big picture of our whole organization, but maybe also bleeding out into our suppliers and our customers and our partners and vendors and things like that. And so it's a much broader view of what it takes to be successful, not just for my department, my business unit, right? It's really the really big picture of what success looks like, and being able to see opportunities to be able to pull those pieces in when we need to, right? And get opinions even from outsiders. So not just people inside the company, but get opinions from partners, vendors, customers, things like that, and pull those in to try to make better decisions as a group, right? So last one here, and probably most important, is self-awareness. So this is where we see a lot of challenge with leaders, right? Really, as you grow in this model, oftentimes, again, starting at the expert, it's a lot of, my knowledge, my capability, that kind of stuff. The achiever then being able to look at a little bit bigger picture of strategy and be able to rely on the fact that I probably have some pretty good ideas, and we should, people should follow me, and great things are going to happen. And as you get to the catalyst leader, really becomes, again, the big leap of, I may not have the best ideas. My solutions may not be the right ones. And especially if you're going through an agile transformation where you might have been a leader in a traditional organization, a waterfall organization, where there's a lot different mentality coming into that kind of approach. And if we go to agile, it's a much more collaborative situation. And oftentimes leaders have to look themselves in the mirror and say, you know what, I've become a leader. I've become a VP, C-level person in our organization by mastering this old system of big upfront planning and command and control and all those kind of things. And I've mastered, I figured out how it all works. And now I have to look myself in the mirror and realize that's not how we should do it anymore, right? And I have to lead the change. And that kind of capability to understand that and then take action on it is what we're talking about with the catalyst leader and self-awareness. It's really becoming aware that you need to start changing, right? It's not about everyone else, it's about me. And if we're gonna lead it, it's gotta be me first, right? That's a big part of it. And so if we're really gonna be successful and get on this lasting change, the growing agility line, it really is gonna take people that are thinking more towards this catalyst mindset, this catalyst leadership style, where you have a bigger view of the future, an understanding of the whole organization and all the ecosystem in which we play, and then your personal self-awareness to really go beyond yourself to try to truly become that servant leader who's really invested in everyone else being successful, right? And so that kind of capability is what we're looking for to try to pull culture and change the things that really matter in organizations in a very selfless way, because we know it's going to be better for everyone, right? And so as we think about going that direction, it's a tough thing for leaders. And so that's why we work with a lot of leaders going through this kind of thing with things like 360 assessments to help understand, where are you now? Where do you want to try to improve to help build your capability as we go into the future? Knowing that it's not just about being a catalyst, it's about being in a situational awareness where you can use these different kinds of styles in different situations. So you can be a catalyst, but you've still got the expert and achiever inside of you. So when you do need to just get that really important program done because it's going to save the company tons of money or something, you can step down into this model to get that thing done, right? Or even down to the expert mode. A lot of times the person is advanced to a VP, but they were still the person that originally wrote the system. They know the ins and outs. And when stuff starts on fire, they can jump down into that mode and actually solve problems at a detail level if they need to. So pretty extreme example there, but that's the kind of stuff we're talking about here in terms of being able to build the capability to guide a successful agile transformation for lasting change, not just temporary check the box agile, but really getting to the deep things that really matter for lasting long-term success with agile. So with that, I want to pause there again for some thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, anything that's not clear. Perfectly clear, awesome. What do you guys think about this? Anyone?
I think what I'm trying to figure out myself is if I am just a Scrum Master, not an organizational leader, how do I keep myself from just creating a thrashing agile transformation, but how do I be a part of a larger picture? Do I just have to be a really good salesperson to the person who can make the actual culture change? Or I don't know, what kind of advice would you give for somebody that's in that spot?
Yeah, well, it sort of gets into, maybe a question that sort of leads to yours, which is, can you be a catalyst leader at a Scrum Master level? Right, so we often think about these catalysts being bigger view of the organization, VP, C-level, that kind of stuff. And the answer is yes, right? You can. So this catalyst mindset, this catalyst behavior certainly can exist at any level of the organization. And so if we think about this sort of going beyond yourself, and oftentimes that's what we're trying to build with Scrum Masters, is the ability to be selfless, look at the bigger picture. And it's not just about getting this sprint taken care of and making sure we get all the work done. It's about setting up for long-term success, building capability with the team, right? And that kind of stuff. So we sort of take care of that question. The answer is yes, right? So you can have each of these three capabilities at any level of the organization. And of course, the opposite of that is oftentimes we see expert leaders in very senior roles, and sometimes that doesn't work out very well because they have a very limited view. But so to come back to your question, thinking about how do you affect change from a Scrum Master role, thinking like a catalyst, right? And being able to speak the language of people that do have ownership or control over those different aspects of policy, metrics, structure. And so oftentimes it's being able to explain to them, this whole concept and model that we just sort of talked through, and why those things are important, and why, just getting today's work done or changing a process isn't going to really make the lasting change. And so, sometimes it's going to be, trying to find the right person at the right time with the right piece of information. And so, my advice for Scrum Masters oftentimes is trying to find, credible articles out there that they can sort of, just either email or slip on the side of the desk of someone who might be able to make some change or needs some better understanding. So, certainly there's a lot of reputable publications out there now that are really picking up Agile. The May, June cover of Harvard Business Review was about Agile, so that's a good one. You've got a lot of articles in Forbes and things like that. So those might be things to grab and be able to share with someone, then talk through the idea of making lasting change and really addressing the things that matter. And actually that Harvard Business Review article does a reasonable job of thinking through some of that. I think it's a couple of guys from Boston Consulting Group, if I remember correctly. And they're talking about some of these kind of concepts of making lasting change. So that might help a little bit.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, Aaron, this is Muzaffar. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have a question. We are talking about agile transformation, and the thought that's coming to my mind is what you explained in the beginning. Why are we doing it? And I want to make sure I understand it. So the need is driven by the changing business model, or the changing, should say, stop in the journey of the company. So company was an innovator, now it's becoming more of a stable company.
There's some certainly aspects of that as your company evolves, the culture will likely evolve with it over the course of time, right? And sometimes those cycles repeat. So as we become maybe too stagnant, too internally focused, we need to focus more on innovation and building new products and things like that. So certainly, the culture can continue to cycle, but the need for agility is less about your culture, and it's more about the needs in the market, right? So what's going on with your company in the broader context of the market in your competitive landscape and things like that. And so generally what we see is that complexity is increasing. Things are getting faster, right? There's a lot more automation. There's a lot more customer choice out there, things like that. And so the world is just getting faster and faster, right? Things are evolving. Product life cycles are shorter. All those kind of things are really important factors. And so just thinking about, there's a poster right behind me. I'll just grab it. Oh, nice having the home office now where I actually teach my classes virtually. I can just go grab the poster I drew yesterday. So, this one, just to kind of answer your question a little bit, as we think about the evolution of companies and management, the speed of change is increasing quite a bit as we get into the 2000s and now, of course, 2020. The speed of change is increasing. Like I said, product life cycles are shorter. Customer needs are changing more rapidly. Technology is advancing. And so all those kind of things lend themselves towards the need for agility. If we think about agility, the short definition I usually give of agility being having a mindset to deliver customer value and adapt to change rapidly, essentially is what it's about. And so given the speed of change, it's really important that we start managing differently. So going from traditional management back in the 1900s and factory workers and Taylorism, getting into the 50s and lean, where we started empowering workers and trusting them to do the right thing. And now really going beyond that and beyond the individual worker, we have to have teams that can collaborate and deliver together faster. And this is where we're sort of talking about feature teams, where instead of having one person build one part and then tighten the nut and then put on the windshield and the steering wheel, we need teams that can just build a car together fast and get it out the door, right? And so that same kind of concept applied to all companies pretty much, because things are just getting faster. And if you're not getting faster, your competitors are, and it's not too long before things are going to start getting pretty rocky for you. And so that idea of the speed of change increasing requires that we have teams of trusted people that can really get the job done together quickly, understand customer feedback, and then adapt to change again, right? So instead of having to rely on feedback coming to a manager who then dictates down what should happen, these teams have to be able to do that for themselves. And to do that, we need a new kind of leader, a leader that can coach and empower and trust people to get the job done, and really, instead of coaching the work, they're coaching the people to think for themselves. That's a huge shift in management thinking, right? Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Other thoughts, questions? All right.
I guess my thought is that for a lot of companies, in order to make a successful agile transformation, you also have to start adopting a digital transformation roadmap that's in parallel, so that you can start moving faster, and vice versa.
Yeah, it's certainly going to help. So, especially when we think about software development, certainly having a lot of automation and things that come along with DevOps and the ability to deliver quickly. So once we get feedback, then it's how fast can we get a response to that feedback. And so certainly, digital transformation, DevOps pipeline, those kind of things are all pretty important to getting that to work pretty effectively. So, certainly management and leadership can help move that along, right? By supporting it, making good decisions about how we start to change in our digital transformation. And then really, like you said, sort of doing those in parallel, or really marrying those up and doing those at the same time together. And that's probably what I would suggest as we start thinking about the alignment of culture and agile. And that really, if we're talking about anything to do with technology and software and product delivery, really lends itself towards digital transformation as well, right? Accompanying pieces of it and putting that all together into sort of one organizational change package. And then what ends up happening is we're constantly in an organizational change paradigm, right? It's not going to end. This change curve of increasing speed and complexity of work is only going to get faster and faster. And so we have to recognize that there's no stopping point to it anymore. We're not going to just make the organizational change and then take a big rest for a couple of years. We're going to have to keep going, right? This is a marathon. And so really marrying those things up is a really good idea. It's a good observation about digital transformation, sort of alignment here. Good call.
So Aaron, how does it impact the the employees who are working in that company? I'm assuming with change, some people may not be comfortable, they may leave, or some people may not be needed, so they may be let go. So is it fair to assume that the agile transformation will cause a lot of churn in the employees?
It's a good question. And so I think, so if you do it right, I would say that there's not a very high risk that people should be laid off or let go because of an agile transformation. I think that just shouldn't happen, right? If we do it correctly. The problem is when you have leaders who haven't done what they've supposed to have been doing for the last decade, and then they use agile transformation to finally do the right thing, which is to, reposition people, ask people to leave that shouldn't be here anymore, that kind of stuff. They've just delayed and been weak. And so using agile transformation as an excuse to do that is just not a good idea, right? I think that's just a misuse or mischaracterization of what agile transformation is about. What we should see with an agile transformation is that we start repositioning people to higher value delivery roles. And so if you think about it, as we start to empower teams to make their own decisions, they don't need people as middlemen and bottlenecks and things like that anymore. What it starts lending itself towards is managers and leaders who are further along that advancement in the leadership agility curve. And so we're going to need maybe less and less of the managers doing the job of managing people, right? Because people start to manage themselves to a certain degree, not fully, right? But we start asking the people to rely on themselves more and their team more, right? So it reduces the role and the need for specific people management at a detail level oftentimes, and becomes more of a coaching role. And so with that kind of approach though, then it frees that person up to step into a different kind of role that's either higher value delivery. They can start looking at more catalyst kind of things like the bigger picture of, hey, let's look at our whole delivery mechanism and see how we can optimize it, right? So instead of managing tactical detailed work in my one little department, I can start looking at bigger picture kind of things that actually matter to the value delivery system. And so that's what we'd like to see happen in agile transformations. Now, that doesn't happen all the time because a lot of people don't know how to do an agile transformation properly. And that's the unfortunate part. Lots of charlatans out there. So if we do it right and really help leaders understand what they're getting into, make good decisions, then we see a lot of good things happen, a lot of benefits. And the people, in terms of churn, back to your question, there is some, most likely because people get, comfortable and complacent and, may not want to change or adapt. But if that's where our company is going, we've got to bring the people that want to go that direction probably, right? And sometimes there's opportunities to find different roles and different positions for them, but sometimes there's not, right? Sometimes people just don't want to come along on that journey and be on this path of constant change. But if that's what's going to take in our market to be successful, then we've got to find people that are willing to really come on that journey and help us in that endeavor, right? So I don't want to make it sound like it's all just rosy rainbows and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, this is where the world is most likely headed because things are getting faster. We've got to deal with it, right? And I mean, all of us have dealt with this in the last few months, massive change very quickly and having to adapt to it. And I imagine some of us have done that much better than others. And a lot of it's because we've started on the agile path. We've started to empower our people, trust them, teach them, coach them, that kind of stuff. And so companies that have done that, I think, are faring much better. And I see that evidence from a lot of our clients who have gone that direction and new clients that haven't. We're starting to see a lot of differences in how they're dealing with what's going on right now with the pandemic and things like that.
Yeah,
So,
I think,
sorry for the long answer to your question, but there you go.
I think it goes back to what you were saying about the leadership too. You have to do your self-assessment as an employee and assess where you're at. The company should invest in continual learning for their employees, but it's really personal responsibility, which is great about Agile. It helps promote personal responsibility and continual learning. And if you're not going to, self-assess where you're at and where you want to be, you're not going to be as successful. So
that's exactly right. And this idea, by the way, of learning organizations has been around for quite a while. I think about Peter Senge, the fifth discipline, systems thinking, that's all from the 80s, right? Learning organizations. And that's a lot of think about what an agile organization would look like. It's a lot of that kind of stuff where we're learning faster than our competitors and responding to change faster. And I think that's the big part that Agile has brought to the table. It's taking the learning organization and putting action to it, right? So that we're actually taking advantage of opportunities we find, not just identifying them, but actually seizing opportunities. And that's, I think, where the advancement of Agile has come in the last 20, 30 years. It's good stuff. All right, well, I think I might be over time. I think we were going until 7:15, so I see it's almost 7:20. So I'm happy to keep answering questions all night, but I know some of you have other things you need to do, probably, hang out with your family and that kind of stuff. So I just want to say thanks for having me. It's always great to be here at Agile Indy, and always got a special place in my heart, of course. So let me throw it back over to Jenny and Scott. And thanks, everyone. Great to have you. Thanks for coming. And of course, if you have any questions for me, feel free to shoot me an email, Aaron@ProjectBrilliant. And of course, oh, I forgot, I drew a special poster for the end here too. So of course, we're offering virtual online training classes, and all the stuff we just talked about is part of our leadership class as well. So happy to have you come join us for that. So the next one's, I think, the end of this month. So happy to have you come join, but we also do, of course, other classes as well. So thanks, everyone. And I'll throw it back over to Jenny and Scott.
Thank you, Aaron. And that was the question, actually, if you could talk about some of your upcoming classes, but I'm assuming everything's on your website.
Yeah, so projectbrilliant.com/trainings.
Yeah.
So we do Certified Scrum Master, Product Owner, Certified Scrum Developer, Agile Leadership, and less as well. So,
Oh, nice.
by the way, we've got a great class coming up that we're doing a one-day class on scaling Agile in terms of comparing all the scaling frameworks. So safe, less, Scrum at scale, all those kind of things, comparing, contrasting those and helping you to pick which one's right for you. So check out our website, Project Brilliant Trainings, and sign up for that class.
There's just one of those though, right? For the scaling one?
Yeah, so it's a one-day class, and we cover all the different scaling frameworks and sort of compare, contrast, go through the pros and cons, that kind of stuff. Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much, Aaron. We appreciate you coming. Everyone else, thank you so much for coming. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.